Imagine a teenager who throws up every single Tuesday morning before school.
Like clockwork.
Literally.
Right.
The timeline is always the exact same. They drag their feet,
Yeah.
they complain about a stomach ache, and, it all culminates right when they need to walk out the front door.
And it is incredibly easy to just call that teenager lazy.
Oh, totally. It's so easy to say they're faking it to get out of a math test or, that they just don't care about their education. But what if that Tuesday morning stomach ache isn't a discipline problem at all?
Right. What if it's actually a highly accurate biological alarm system?
Exactly. And we are so glad you're here with us today for this deep dive because the materials we have on the desk are going to completely upend how we view struggling students.
It's a total paradigm shift.
It really is.
Okay.
Let's unpack this. We're taking that default label, the word lazy, and we are replacing it with a framework that's designed to actually solve the problem.
And that shift away from the lazy label, well, that's where any real progress has to begin.
Yeah.
Because when an adult looks at a disengaged kid and decides, they just don't care, the investigation stops.
It's just a dead end.
It's a complete conversational and diagnostic dead end. Relying on that label keeps every single interaction strictly within the realm of discipline.
Like you're just managing the annoyance.
Right. The adult's goal just becomes forcing compliance or issuing punishment. But the sources we're looking at today argue that discipline only manages the surface level inconvenience of the behavior.
And that's not helping anyone.
No. The real goal is to force a shift from a discipline conversation to a clinical conversation.
And to make that massive jump from discipline to clinical analysis, the adults in the room really need a completely new lens.
Because you can't just tell a frustrated teacher to, be more clinical.
Right. They need actual tools. And the materials provide this framework built around 3 targeted questions that restructure how we help these students.
Which is such a practical starting point.
Yeah. So the first step involves looking for absence patterns. Instead of just asking why a kid is missing school generally, the framework asks us to look at whether the absences show up around, specific subjects or specific days of the week.
Which is such a vital distinction because it immediately removes the character judgments from the equation.
It's just data.
Exactly. It replaces judgment with data collection. A student is rarely just randomly defiant.
Right.
If they consistently skip third period, or if they always have a meltdown on Thursday mornings, that is a highly specific data point indicating a localized threat in their environment.
It's exactly like tracking a food allergy. Or honestly, even debugging a piece of complex software.
Oh, I like that analogy.
Yeah, like if a program crashes every time you run a specific command, you don't just yell at the computer and call it a lazy machine.
Right, you look at the logs.
You look at the logs, you ask what exact line of code was executing when the system failed, you look for the trigger. Just like if you get hives every Tuesday, you analyze what you're eating on Tuesdays.
Sure. And the source material explicitly identifies what those environmental triggers usually point to in a school setting.
Which are what, usually?
Well, anxiety operates in patterns. Sensory overwhelm operates in patterns. Bullying is heavily patterned.
So it's very rarely random.
Right. That localized threat you're debugging could be, say, the sensory overload of a massive echoing cafeteria.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Or it could be a specific peer dynamic in the hallway right before gym class. Or crippling performance anxiety tied to reading aloud in English class.
So by tracking the pattern, you validate that the student is actually reacting to something real, rather than just being, inherently unmotivated.
Precisely.
But the reality is a lot of kids don't just skip the class. Their bodies actively rebel before they even leave the house. Which brings us to the second part of this framework.
The physical symptoms.
Right, it looks at somatic complaints. The framework prompts adults to ask if there are things like stomach aches, headaches, or extreme fatigue that cluster specifically around school mornings.
What's fascinating here is how the source material frames the biological reality of that question. It states, and this is a direct quote, "Bodies process stress before kids have words for it."
Wow. That is powerful.
It really is. We often place this completely unfair expectation on young people.
Like they should be therapists themselves.
Right. We expect a 12-year-old to sit down at the breakfast table and articulate, "I am experiencing acute social anxiety regarding my peer group dynamics today."
Which is ridiculous.
They do not have that vocabulary. I mean, most adults barely have that vocabulary.
Or even the self-awareness to realize that is what they're feeling.
Exactly. The conscious mind might not understand the emotion yet, but the nervous system registers the threat instantly.
So it bypasses the brain entirely.
Pretty much. The brain signals the gut, the muscles tense up, the head begins to throb. The somatic complaint is not a manipulation tactic.
The pain is real.
The physical pain is entirely real to them. It is the body sounding a fire alarm because it perceives the school environment as a literal physical threat.
Okay, I hear that, but let's be real for a second.
Sure.
If I am an exhausted parent at 7:30 in the morning, I'm already late for my own job, the kid is dragging their feet, and suddenly there's a mysterious stomach ache right before the bus arrives.
It's stressful.
Yeah. My immediate instinct is not to perform a clinical analysis of their nervous system. My instinct is get in the car. We do not have time for this.
Of course.
So how does asking this specific question disrupt that immediate frustrated adult reaction? How does this framework actually survive the chaos of a Tuesday morning?
Well, that is the exact friction point this framework is engineered to disrupt.
Really?
Yeah, it's designed to act as a circuit breaker for adult frustration.
A circuit breaker. I love that.
Right, because when you, as a parent or a school counselor, train yourself to ask, wait, is this clustering around school mornings? You are stepping out of your own emotional reactivity.
You pause.
It gives the exhausted adult permission to stop being a warden and start being an investigator. It shifts your internal narrative from, this child is manipulating my schedule, to, this child's nervous system is trying to communicate something they cannot say out loud.
Which fundamentally changes the dynamic of the morning routine. You aren't fighting the kid anymore.
You're teaming up with them.
Exactly. You are teaming up to decode what their body is saying. And that sets up a really fascinating pivot.
How so?
Well, because physical symptoms like those morning stomach aches or the specific absence patterns we just talked about, they don't just materialize out of thin air.
Right, they have a source.
They're flowing down from somewhere. So the final piece of the framework asks, has anything shifted recently at home, in friendships, or online?
Yes. This gets to the absolute core of the methodology. The text provides a defining rule for this phenomenon. It says, most school refusal is a downstream symptom of an upstream change.
Downstream symptom. Upstream change.
If we conceptualize a child's life as a river, the school environment is almost always downstream.
Because that's where everything pools together.
Right. It's where the water collects, where they spend the majority of their waking hours, and where their behavior and performance are constantly measured.
So when there is turbulence, like when they refuse to go to school, or they act out in class, or just put their head on the desk and completely check out, that is the downstream symptom.
Yes.
It's the wet floor.
Exactly. But the source of that turbulence, the leak itself, is almost always upstream.
Like what kind of things?
It might be a recent fracture in a core friendship. It might be a shift in the home dynamic, like a divorce or a parent losing a job.
That makes total sense.
Or, as the text acutely points out, it is often something happening invisibly in their digital lives.
Oh, right. Social media.
The cyberbullying or the exclusion that happens at 11:00 p.m. is the upstream change. The refusal to get out of bed at 7:00 a.m. is the downstream symptom.
It is such a clarifying way to view behavior, and the text explicitly notes that these three questions are not meant to be accusations, but an invitation.
That's a crucial distinction.
It feels massive. I mean, it's the difference between just repeatedly mopping up a puddle on the floor, getting increasingly furious that the floor keeps getting wet, versus finally handing the mop to someone else and asking, hey, where is this leaky faucet? Let's go find it.
That analogy captures the psychology perfectly.
Right. You aren't blaming the floor.
No, because an accusation puts a student immediately on the defensive. If you ask, why are you always missing Tuesday classes? Why are you faking sick? You are forcing the child to build a wall to protect themselves.
And honoring them.
Exactly. But an invitation saying something like, hey, I've noticed your stomach hurts a lot on math days. Has something shifted lately? That lowers the wall.
It's so much gentler.
It signals to the student that you are a safe person and that you see their underlying struggle, not just their failure to comply with the rules.
But, okay, this is where the rubber meets the road.
Let's hear it.
Because this framework is beautiful in theory. Treating a child with clinical curiosity instead of disciplinary force sounds amazing on a deep dive.
Sure does.
But how does an underfunded, overwhelmed school actually operationalize this? You can't just tell a school counselor who has a caseload of 500 kids to, walk upstream and investigate digital lives when they barely have time to process schedule changes.
Without a boat, they are just going to drown in that river.
Exactly.
And that is the exact structural deficit that traps so many schools in the discipline model. The framework of the three questions provides the theory, but to actually execute that theory at scale, you need serious, integrated infrastructure.
Which brings us to the specific case study in our sources. We are looking at an organization called MentalSpace School, which operates in Georgia.
Right.
And we're examining this not as a promotional exercise, but as an archetype for what happens when a community actually funds and builds the infrastructure required to support this clinical mindset.
They're providing K-12 schools with an entirely integrated mental health system.
Right. They provide same-day teletherapy and dedicated therapist teams assigned directly to specific schools.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, they aren't just treating the individual student in a vacuum.
No, they are building an entire ecosystem.
The source mentions that alongside critical care elements like crisis intervention and suicide prevention, they offer broader ecosystem supports, like family counseling.
Which pulls the home environment right into the clinical conversation.
Exactly. And, crucially, they explicitly provide staff wellness programs.
Wait, okay. I get why the kids and families need support, but why is staff wellness explicitly listed here alongside crisis intervention for students?
It's a great question.
Like, why is the staff's mental health a critical piece of the student's success?
Because human nervous systems co-regulate.
Co-regulate.
Yeah. Think back to that exhausted parent on a Tuesday morning, and now multiply that exhaustion by a classroom of 30 distinct developing nervous systems sustained over a 9-month school year.
Oh, man. That sounds exhausting.
It is. Teachers and school staff are the frontline observers. They are the ones who have to notice those localized absence patterns we talked about. They're the ones who have to spot the somatic complaints before they escalate.
Right.
But if a teacher is entirely burned out and operating in a state of chronic survival mode, stress themselves, their capacity for empathy and observation biologically diminishes.
Their bandwidth for curiosity just evaporates.
Exactly. A dysregulated adult fundamentally cannot regulate a dysregulated child.
That makes so much sense.
If the adult is in fight or flight mode, they will default to the quickest, easiest discipline conversation just to survive the class, period.
So they just send the kid to the principal's office.
Right. So by prioritizing staff wellness, this model ensures that the adults in the building actually have the emotional and neurological bandwidth to invite a clinical conversation.
You have to give the teachers the oxygen mask first.
So they can actually walk upstream with the kids.
It is treating the entire ecosystem rather than just playing whack-a-mole with the symptom.
Absolutely.
But here's the major caveat to all of this. An ecosystem model, no matter how comprehensive, is functionally useless if the families in the community cannot afford to use it.
Or if they don't trust it.
Right. If they fundamentally do not trust the practitioners providing the care, systems fail. Period. Here's where it gets really interesting, though.
How so?
The source material addresses this head-on, detailing the mechanics of how MentalSpace School removes those exact barriers. On the financial accessibility side, it's wild. For students on Medicaid, the out-of-pocket cost is $0.
That's huge.
And for families with private insurance, they've negotiated with almost every major private insurer in the state.
Just removing that friction.
Totally. I mean, we are talking Blue Cross, Blue Shield, Cigna, Aetna, United Healthcare, Humana, Peach State, CareSource, Amerigroup. They have intentionally designed a system that ensures the financial barrier to entry is virtually eliminated for the vast majority of the student body.
But, removing the financial barrier just gets people in the door. Establishing trust is what actually allows the clinical work to happen. A free service that a community fears or feels alienated by simply won't be utilized.
So how do they build that trust?
The text details how they do this through strict privacy and cultural alignment. They navigate the complex web of both medical privacy and educational privacy, usually known as HIPAA and FERPA, so that a child's clinical data and therapy notes do not inappropriately bleed into their academic record.
Oh, so it doesn't just become hallway gossip.
Exactly. The therapy space is a locked vault.
The sources also emphasize that the teams consist of licensed, diverse therapists who are culturally competent. Why is that specific operational detail so vital when we are talking about analyzing upstream changes in kids?
Because culture heavily dictates how distress is expressed.
Right.
A therapist's job in this framework is to spot those upstream changes and accurately decode those somatic complaints. If the therapist does not understand the cultural context of the student sitting in front of them, they will misread the data.
Do you have an example of that?
Sure. For example, in some cultures, a lack of eye contact is a sign of deep respect for authority.
Oh.
But in a Western clinical setting, it might be misread as defiance, withdrawal, or shiftiness.
Yeah.
What might look like aggressive behavior to an outside observer might actually be a deeply ingrained cultural response to community stress.
That's a dangerous misunderstanding to make.
Very dangerous. Misinterpreting trauma as defiance is a fast track to the school-to-prison pipeline.
Wow.
A culturally competent, diverse therapy team ensures that the clinical conversation is not clouded by cultural misunderstandings. It ensures the students actually feel seen and understood in their own context, which is the absolute foundation of therapeutic trust.
And when you combine that level of deep contextual trust with absolute financial accessibility and an upstream diagnostic framework, the results are staggering.
The outcomes are really something.
They really are. The source provides the tangible outcomes of this specific model in Georgia. We're looking at 89% improved attendance. We are looking at 85% family satisfaction. And this is the one that really stops you in your tracks. A 92% reduction in anxiety.
92%.
I want you listening right now to really process that number. What does a 92% reduction in anxiety actually look and feel like for a kid who used to be paralyzed by morning stomach aches?
It's giving them their childhood back.
Exactly. That is not just a statistical bump. That is a kid who used to view the school building as a predator, finally able to just sit in an English class and actually learn.
Because the upstream turbulence has been identified and addressed.
So what does this all mean? We started today with the trap of assuming a struggling kid just doesn't care. From there, we explored the escape route tracking localized absence patterns, recognizing that physical complaints are the body's early warning system, and understanding that every downstream refusal is connected to an upstream change.
And we looked at how an archetype like Georgia's MentalSpace school proves that when an entire ecosystem adopts this framework, the outcomes are genuinely life-changing.
It is an incredible journey.
It serves as a powerful blueprint for how we need to support the next generation. But, as we reflect on these sources, it leaves me with a much larger, lingering thought.
Let's hear it.
We have spent this entire deep dive talking about children in schools, but human biology does not fundamentally change the day we graduate high school.
That's a good point.
If a student's body processes stress before they have the words for it, and we are finally learning to read those somatic complaints as critical data rather than simple defiance, what other defiant behaviors in our society are actually just downstream symptoms?
Oh, wow.
Right. When we look at our adult workplaces, or the hostility in our daily commutes, or the friction in our public spaces, how much of that is actually just the downstream result of our own unaddressed upstream systemic overwhelm?
That reframes almost every interaction we have. We might just need to apply the upstream framework to ourselves and the adults around us. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive today. Keep observing the patterns, keep walking upstream, and keep asking the right questions. We will catch you next time.